Ranking every AR in Warzone from Modern Warfare all the way to Vanguard weapons. Welcome back, I'm Austin, and I'll start with the Cold War ARs, and the Krig's gonna be number one of the lowest skill weapons to ever exist. Even my bot friends could use this thing effectively, but the TTK is horrendous, so I'm gonna be throwing this thing down in the viable tier, because I just don't think it has a high enough ceiling to be considered competitive or top meta. But if you're a bot, you can use this weapon. Now the FARA 83, this one used to be meta. They did nerf its TTK a little bit. It's pretty accurate just like the Krig, but has a little bit more upside, so I'm gonna throw it in the competitive tier. I still think this weapon can definitely be used within Caldera. Now the XM4 is freaking great because it is so versatile. It can be used as an SMG, a sniper support. I personally like using it as a long range weapon the best. It only needs one neck shot to lower its time to kill to be elite. It's really accurate and it just can be used in so many ways. So I'm gonna throw that in top meta tier. Now the FFAR, this thing used to be absolutely busted in Warzone, but it's been nerfed a couple times, and it's still a pretty decent sniper support, but I think it's a little bit too slow with its mobility to be considered competitive or meta, and I think it's going to be in the viable tier once again. Now the QBZ, I made a whole video on this thing where I made it a mystery weapon comparing it to the AK-47 and PPSH from Cold War, because no one really understands that this thing can actually be a viable sniper support weapon, and I'm going to throw in a competitive because this thing has the mobility of an SMG with the range of an AR and a solid time to kill of like 619 milliseconds. So this thing is sneakily good. If you want to see a class setup, I'll have that video linked up on the screen right now. And then for the Groza, I've never really used this in Warzone outside of ground loot. Looking at the stats, its time to kill looks pretty solid. The mobility isn't great, the recoil isn't great. I just think it's kind of a worse version of the FFAR, below average for me. The AK-47, this thing is still meta. Great sniper support, can still be used at long range or as an SMG. This is versatile just like the XM4, but I think the XM4 is a little bit better because it has better mobility. But the AK, still a fantastic weapon. Effin' Scar. Honestly, its stats aren't that bad, but its magazine is just way too small to ever be considered viable. So I'm gonna throw it in niche just because it can technically be effective maybe in solos, but I don't think I'd ever use this over any other weapon. The Ram 7. This is still a decent sniper support weapon. I'd never use this thing for long range. I'm gonna throw it in viable. I kind of think it's similar to the FFAR right now, and that's just where I'm gonna throw it. Now, for the M4A1, this is kind of the jack of all trades AR. It's kind of like the XM4 AK, but just not quite as good because it has horrendous mobility. But this was the meta weapon when Warzone was first released, just because I think the M4 was so beloved by the community in multiplayer. But the M4A1 can be used at long range or up close. I'm going to throw it in viable. The FR 556 burst rifle, I just like to call this thing the FAMAS. I really don't think it's that good. The reason it's bad, and I'm going to throw it in below average, is its theoretical time to kill is pretty good, but the bullet spread, when you shoot the burst, the three bullets kind of just spread out from each other really far. Actually really hard to hit all three bullets from one burst at range, so I'm going to throw it in below average, even though theoretically you can get a good time to kill. The Oden, I haven't used this in a while until the Christmas event came out and it was dropping out of the Krampus trees, and then I gave it a few looks with a custom class and it actually isn't that bad. I'm going to throw it in viable. What it is a really slow firing, heavy hitting AR like the EM2. It just isn't quite good enough for me to throw above viable. If you hit your shots, it can definitely kill pretty quickly. Now, if we go to the M13, this thing is pretty much super low damage per mag. So I would say the M13 is the version of the Krig within Modern Warfare. It's going to be really easy to hit your shots. You can get a theoretically good time to kill, but it is really forgiving because it has a super fast fire rate, super noob friendly, just like the Krig sick. Kilo is sort of in the same boat here, but the Kilo has a little bit better damage per shot and a little bit slower fire rate. And this thing I would almost put in competitive. At 75 meters, the time to kill just drops off tremendously and basically just starts shooting marshmallows. Because it can't be used past 75 meters, I'm gonna throw it in viable. I recently used this in Warzone, and I actually had a fun time with it just using an old meta weapon. Isn't quite there to be considered competitive. Now for the Grau. This is honestly, I know we just did 3 in a row, but the Grau is similar to the M13 Kilo and Krig. I think it's just slightly better, and I want to put it in competitive, but I'm just gonna put it in the top of the viable section. It's one of those weapons that's super accurate, an okay but not great time to kill, a little bit slower than average. I would use the FAR 83 QBZ over it any day of the week. Now the Modern Warfare AK-47, this thing is not good. just throw it down here in below average. There's no reason to ever use this weapon in Warzone. The AN-94 is going to be another one of those weapons that is on the brink of below average and viable. It has like this faster fire rate in the first couple bullets of its clip, and if you hit those few shots, then it has a good TTK, but if you miss them, then it sucks. And I just don't think for the average player it's going to be viable, so I'm going to throw it in below average. The Amax, this gun is actually still pretty solid. I don't know why no one uses it anymore. It was really beloved for a while, and then it got a slight nerf and people stopped using it. And it has a solid time to kill. Just the movement is a little bit trash on it. So I would put it in competitive, but I'd put it below the QBZ and the FARA. Now the STG-44 with the first Vanguard weapon, I know I've missed a couple guns like the EM2 on here. It must be somewhere down on this list that I missed, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but we'll start off with the STG, which is definitely a top meta weapon that I'm going to throw in right here. This thing is viable just like the XM4 and the AK-47. This thing's great at long range and great as a sniper support. You just have way more attachments, which means you can deck this thing out, and I personally love this gun. I did a comparison of this against the XM4 actually. If you want to see that video, I'll link it in the top right. But the STG-44 is just probably the most accurate gun in the game while still having a good TTK. It's basically if the Krig didn't kill in 900 milliseconds. Now the Itra Burst, this is not a gun I've really used in Warzone outside of picking up the ground loot, so I'm not going to say I have a really good determination on how good this weapon is, but just from picking it up, it was pretty accurate, but it didn't seem to kill that quickly, so I'm just going to throw it in below average, but don't really take my word on this one, I've barely used it. The bar reminds me of the EM2 mixed with the Krig, and I'm going to tell you why. It shoots really slow like the EM2, but it's super accurate like the Krig 6. My favorite way to build this thing out is to kind of make it like a DMR where you're tap firing it, but you hit every single shot. Caught with this thing out at close range, you're absolutely going to get cooked. It's pretty good, but not quite competitive in my opinion. I'd actually put it at the top of it because I'd rather use the bar than any of these other weapons. The AS-44, this is another one of those guns that's pretty versatile, but it just isn't quite as good as the top three, so I'm going to throw it in competitive. It actually can get a really good time to kill. All of its attachments put together, you can't quite make it fit into any bracket perfectly. You can't make it great for long range, you can't make it fantastic as a sniper support. If you want to move a little bit slow and have a super accurate sniper support, you can do that, or if you want to have a pretty inaccurate gun but has a really fast time to kill up close as a sub, you can do that as well. The AS-44 is just a good option, not a great one. The Automaton. Honestly, this gun was meta right when it was released, then it got nerfed down into viable, and now it's back into meta because they rebuffed it to make it more accurate as well as getting rid of some visual recoil. So the Automaton is fully back as a long-range AR, and it's not terrible as a sniper support, but I think it kills a little too slow, so I'd pretty much throw this in as a great long-range option. The NC41 is a weird gun. When the game first came out with Vanguard weapons integrated into Warzone, I honestly really liked this thing and thought it was competitive, but then they nerfed its recoil a bit, and I decided to knock it down to viable because what they did with the recoil is they made it where after about 20 shots, it's just random. Like the bullets will randomly go left, right, up, down. Like the recoil makes no sense. And now for the Volk, this thing is pretty decent. I tried it out as a sniper support when Vanguard just got integrated into Warzone, and it was pretty solid, has a quick fire rate, pretty accurate. The mobility is a little slow for my liking, so I'm going to throw it in viable because I wouldn't use it at long range or sniper support weapon. This thing is pretty solid. And the Cooper Carbine, I don't even know where to start with this weapon, but I'm just going to say it's the top AR in the entire game. It's versatile like these other ones, can be used as an SMG, sniper support, or long range option, but it just does it a little bit better than these other four. They just have so many busted attachments on this that boost the fire rate and don't lower the damage, and it's just increasing the time to kill, and it doesn't even become less accurate. So I love using this gun right now as an SMG, and we're going to move on to the weapons I forgot about, which was the AsVal, and then there was the EM2 and Grav, which I could not find in this pile of weapons. Let me know if you can spot the gun inside of this giant mess. So the AsVal, let's start off with that. We're going to have to call that niche because it's the fastest time to kill among all fully automatic weapons inside of Warzone, but it only has a 30-round mag and super slow mobility. I did used to love using this as a sniper support option in solos. You're just going to be moving around really, really slow. That's the only mode you can get away with using it. Duos and on, this thing has too small of a mag and too slow of movement speed to give it justice. The Magnum's going to be the EM2 here, and this thing a lot of people think is meta right now, but I'm only going to throw it in competitive. It's a slow-firing, heavy-hitting AR, and the recoil is not great on it, very un-noob friendly, but that is not why it's in competitive instead of meta. It's because of the type of map this is with all the mountains and hills. You're you're going to be getting in way more long-range engagements, and your theoretical time to kill is great on this weapon. But if you miss any shots, the actual difference between its theoretical and the time to kill you're getting will be super vast. If you're a really good player and can use this weapon effectively by hitting all of your shots or 90% of them, then it's going to be very good. It just doesn't make sense when you can get just as good of a TTK with most of these weapons up here, but it's a lot easier to accomplish. The Diamante will be the Grav, and when it first got implemented into Warzone, I thought the Grav was trash because the ground loot of it was terrible and you couldn't hit any bullets with it. That thing kicked crazily. But it turns out when you put on a field agent foregrip, a Grau suppressor, etc., it actually isn't that bad and you can hit bullets on it. Now, I found it the best as a sniper support weapon where I made a full video on it. It's just not going to be quite as good as the AK-47 or the STG or the Cooper Carbine as a sniper support weapon, or even the QBZ. Therefore, I'm going to throw it in viable. It's not terrible, but I wouldn't suggest it over any of these weapons up top. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this.